Hi guys! Now we're on to session 8, which is the secondary or the second part of the research, which is secondary research. This is the most important type of research. So this is what you have to do for your report. So anything that you say in your report has to be backed up by secondary sources. They can be books, articles, or websites. When I say articles, I mean articles from journals. So I'm sure you're familiar with books and websites, but the journal part might be new to you. Journals, especially academic journals, are basically a collection of articles for a certain topic. So a journal can be titled nuclear engineering, and then it could be a collection of all these types of articles that are about nuclear engineering. Every article goes into a specific thing about nuclear engineering, and it's usually written by one or more authors, and it's referenced. Every article has more secondary sources into it, linking it. It can usually be peer-reviewed. That means someone else who's also an expert in this topic can then review the paper or the article. So it's more reliable that way. So if we compare it to something like Facebook, where someone can just say and claim anything, then it's not going to be reliable because it could be wrong. Whereas with the articles or books or certain websites and certain books, it's done in a certain way where you are sure that it's done in a scientific way, and the information in these sources are reliable and are true. And so you can rely on it when you're writing a certain report, and you're pretty certain that it's not wrong. Whereas with a primary source, like we said last time, if you're interviewing someone, they might say something that's not accurate. And so you need to link whatever anyone says in an interview to a secondary source. It's very, 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 very important. To make sure that something is reliable, you need to go through a checklist, which I will show over here. You need to think of the author. You need to think of the publication itself, who's published this book or article or website. The data itself, how they've presented and how they've collected the data that they're talking about, and the conclusion. But if you see the article that I've also sent to you, you can see how at the end, there's a list of sources. This is the way how you reference things and how you tell me where you got the information from. Every article and every reliable article, book, or website should be referenced. When you're reading something, you need to know where they're getting their information from. They have to sound unbiased. That's usually how they are. It has to just be straightforward. This is factual, pieces of information, not biased. It's not trying to persuade you into thinking something. It's just presenting the arguments very unbiasedly, very fairly, and then the conclusion is based on the information that you've collected. So you might have two students work on two very similar, it could be the same data, same aim, but they might end up collecting different information and then come up with different conclusions, and that's okay. As long as when I'm reading your article, I see what you've collected and what your conclusion is based on what you've collected. So you could be collecting something different than your friend or colleague. So you might find a book that's not reliable. So like if you're reading from a novel, for example, these are not reliable. Usually the ISBN code is at the back of the book, near the barcode. I don't know if you can see it. And you can Google that and you'll come up with the same book. No other book has the same ISBN code. Now you could have another book, and to determine if it's reliable or not, you can see who the publisher is. So here it's Oxford, so we all know that Oxford should be reliable. They will not publish something that's not accurate. Whereas if you have another book like this one, published by UIT Cambridge, so this is not Cambridge, it's UIT Cambridge. You have to Google what that is, if the publisher is reliable. Then you have to see if the author is reliable. Who is this person? Are they certified to talk about this subject? Are they professionals? Are they experts? So you need to do that kind of thing. And also, when in doubt, try to collect the same piece of information from different sources. And if the different sources that you think are reliable say the same thing, then you can use that piece of information. The most reliable, I would say, are books and articles from journals, scientific journals. Now, where it's a bit tricky, might be the most tricky, is with websites. Some websites might not be reliable. So if they are governmental or scientific from a certain known publisher, such as if you're Googling a certain medical disease or drug, and it comes from, if you get it from the World Health Organization, or if you get it from WebMD, There are certain websites that you can rely on. Other websites might say things. So for example, I had this thing where I was Googling if microwaves are harmful for you. And there was a website that said microwaves change the crystallization of water, and it was talking about how harmful that can be for humans, but that's not backed up by science. It's not actually scientific. And if you Google it from other websites, such as the FDA or other reliable governmental websites, they would tell you that microwaves are actually not harmful, and you have to understand where microwaves are coming from a scientific basis. You need to be sure about these things, and you need to... Someone who isn't aware of that, or who didn't take that in a class, would assume that microwaves are harmful. And if that person reads it in a certain website, it's very easy for them to believe it. So you need to be very careful, very critical. When you come across a website, you need to check that it's reliable. You need to check who the publisher is, who the author is, and do all that kind of information. If it's not immediately reliable to you, you might have to explain to me why you think this certain website you are deeming as reliable. It might not be reliable, but you think that so maybe the publisher, you don't know the publisher, and you're not sure that the publisher is reliable, but the author you think is reliable, and the way it was written, how it was unbiased and how it was referenced, you have determined that it's reliable, and you're going to use that piece of information in your report. You have to just justify it for me. In your report, when you're collecting information, try to as many sources as possible from many different ways. Like, try to aim for a variety of sources. Try to use books, articles, and websites. Try to not rely on one source. I don't want to just see websites or just see books or just see articles, although it does depend on the report, on the type of topic that you're talking about. So some people might want to talk about, I think someone wanted to do a report on Bitcoin, and so obviously you're not going to find books published on Bitcoin, so you're just going to have to use websites. So it depends on the topic, your topic, but try to be as variant as possible. You need to start collecting information now. So you have your aim, you have your objectives, you have your plan. You have to add in your plan that you have to do some research in both arguments, and then you have to form a conclusion to see which argument is better based on what you've collected. You can't reach a conclusion before collecting the information. So what you have to start doing is collecting information for argument 1 and argument 2, its advantages, disadvantages, advantages, disadvantages. We'll talk more about what to do after you've found the information, and how to write it down. That's for later. But for now, you have to start collecting information. So as a homework for next week, I want to see all the information that you've collected, any websites, articles, or books that you found. So now with the books, if it wasn't for COVID, we would go to a public library called Showman Library here in Jordan. It has a lot of physical books that you can go and search and walk through the libraries, but I don't think that's going to happen this year, unfortunately. But you can find books online, and you can find articles from journals. Now, the thing with articles and journals, most reliable articles, you might have to pay to access them. So you need to try to find different ways. So sometimes you might have to pay for them in certain websites, but then if you Google them, you Google a certain article that you found, you can find the full article somewhere else. So it's gonna take a bit of some tricks, to try to get it done. It's not easy, but you can do it. There are websites for articles, so you can Google free journals, free articles, and you can try to find them. They might not be reliable, so you need to be very careful. You need to see who is the publisher, and again, do the same reliable thing. So just because there are articles and journals, you need to see what journal is this, who's published it. There's a library for medicine called PubMed.gov. You can Google that, and you'll see you can use that for medical, for whoever's doing a medical thing for a disease or something, then that could be a good start. There's also Elsevier. So you can do that kind of thing. You can search. So if you see something, you see an article from a certain journal, Google that publisher and see what you come up with. And you can read about it and see what it's based on. And you see how they operate. Do they do peer reviewing? Do they reference, blah, blah, blah. Then you can determine if it's a reliable source or not. Now, just also with Google, just because it comes up at the top does not mean it's reliable. So be very careful, because sometimes companies pay Google to be at the top of their search list. That does not mean they're reliable. Not necessarily. So be very careful about that. So you can use Google as a search engine, obviously, to find websites and articles. But there's also Google Scholar. It's a really good website. There's also other websites. I'll link them. I'll post them in the description, or I'll post them here. Websites that you can use to search for more articles that are going to be reliable. I think with time, you'll get the hang of it more, but you need to start to collect information. For now, just collect the URL that you're going to be finding, collect them all these links that you're going to be finding into a document. It's best if you name each website what it's providing you information for, which argument, and if it's a pro and or a con. So you can open a Word document, you can have argument 1, whatever it is, you have to tell me what your argument is. Then pro, and all the websites or journals or books that are gonna give you information that's pro this argument. Then you can do cons, and then same thing with the other argument. That way it's more organized, and then I'll tell you guys what you can do with it later on. Again, other than Google Scholar, you can do an advanced search on Google. I don't know if you know this, but if you go on Google and you search something, but then you go right above the search bar, you click on settings, and then you can click on advanced search. You can then do some advanced search, basically. I'll show you an example right now of how you can kind of also, if you don't want to do the advanced search, you can do some tricks within Google itself. If you Google Moonlight, you'll come up with a lot of searches on the movie. But say you don't want to talk about the movie. So what you can do is you can do the negative sign and film. Then you're going to get a lot of hits on music. So you can say minus music. Then you're going to get an open source of some sort. So maybe you can then remove game. Another open source. So you can do minus. Now you're starting to see actual moonlight. So what's the source of the moonlight? Moon gets in the sea after I've done a lot of negative signs. So another thing that you can do. So maybe you say Rosary School. And you're getting, if you scroll down a bit, you also get Rosary College. But let's say you only want Rosary School. You only want Rosary School options. So what you can do is you can put that into brackets. And then you're only going to get Rosary School results. You're only going to get results that have Rosary School in them right next to each other, after each other. These are just some tools that you can use that could be helpful for when you research anything. I also want you to be critical, and then also to do some analysis, to go deeper into the information that you're collecting instead of just being very shallow. So I'll also provide certain questions that you can ask yourself over and over again to know how you can go deeper instead of just being very shallow and descriptive. I don't want you to just describe something. You have to go a bit deeper. So when you're collecting information, you need to... So two reliable articles might be saying different things. So you need to see why this person is saying this and this other person is saying this. You need to see what assumptions have they considered and done, and see if you can see any differences, and also what do they have in common. So you can talk about your information. And so sometimes you're going to see that 1,000 words are actually not enough, or 5,000 if you're doing external. But more on this later. For now, just focus on actually collecting the information. In a document that you're collecting all the information from, it's also useful to write down which part of the article you want to use or you intend to use. It will just make things a lot easier for you. We'll go on the next step later as well. There's more things you can do. Now, most of you might come across Wikipedia. Now, my advice for Wikipedia is not necessarily reliable because it's written by other people and it's not necessarily checked properly in a scientific way. It's not as reliable as articles. Now, you can open it, and if a certain Wikipedia page is referenced well, then it's better than other non-referenced websites, obviously, Wikipedia pages. What you can do is you can use the references that they've used. So you can open a Wikipedia page and then you can click on the websites or whatever books or articles they've used and links to the article itself. And then you can use that link. If it's reliable, you can use it in your report. That's how you can find sources as well. But if you think that the Wikipedia page is good, then you need to check the same way you did before, who the author is, blah, 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 and do see how they've written their information, the data that they've collected. Do they sound that like they're unbiased? And then you can say, I think it's reliable enough, so I'm going to use it. As long as you justify and you tell me that you've actually considered what it is that you're using from this Wikipedia page, if it is reliable, then it's okay. Now, I don't know if you know this, but with Google, you don't have to write a full sentence to find whatever you're looking for. You can just write keywords, such as Alzheimer's disease, treatment, and then the name of the drug. You don't have to say, is this drug used to treat Alzheimer's? You don't have to say that. You can just say Alzheimer's disease, treatment, and then write the drug name. Or even before, without writing the drug name, you could write the drug name, Alzheimer's, search. That's it. Now, when you're doing your research and you Google something, or in Google Scholar, you might come across a lot of websites, a lot of articles. So what you can do is click on each one, open a new tab, open a new tab, open a new tab. When you open it, you don't have to read the whole article to determine if it's reliable or not. You can just go through the subheadings. You can read the introduction very quickly. This is called skim reading, where you don't have to read every single word, but you're trying to see if this is relevant for you or not. So what I personally do at the beginning is I read the conclusion or an abstract, if there is one, because abstract summarizes everything, but in a very, very condensed way. So you can just read the article. If it's related to what you want, then you can open it and read the actual full thing. Again, when I open it, I usually start with a conclusion, see if it's good enough. Then I can go through what they did. Introduction, usually I skip, but if it's something that's new to you, sometimes you just want to get information from the introduction of, like, especially when you're at the descriptive stage. Also, what you can do after that, if you still think that it's reliable, what you can do if you want to read how they did certain things, then you can read only the first and last sentence of each paragraph instead of reading the whole paragraph. This will help you go through a lot more sources than you would if you were to read every single word, which you don't have to. Also, you can use Control F and type a word that you're looking for. That way you can see where in the document they're mentioning the specific word, and you can read only the part of the document that mentions that word. It's just things that you can do. For now, if you're accessing articles and books, this is also for websites, through your computer, which I'm assuming you will, take note of the URL, because you're going to need the author's name, the title. If it's a journal, what is the name of the journal, as well as along with the name of the article. You need to also see when it was published, whether it's a website or an article or a book. You need to know these things for later on. But if you can use a URL for now that you can click on later and check this information later on if you are going to use this source later on. Now, this is it for today's session about collecting information, resources. Now you know how to collect primary and secondary sources. But you now need to know what to do after you've collected this information. Collecting is only 20% of your grade. You need to also do some analysis and to actually, what do you do with it? What's the next step with the analysis part? But we'll discuss that later on, and how you can start to write things down. That is all for later. But for now, try to focus on collecting information. You have to check that it's reliable. And yeah, it's good to, after each link, website, article, or journal, it's good to tell me if you think it's reliable and why. You can say that the publisher is good, the author is good, the data seems to be unbiased, it's referenced well, it's blah, 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 blah. You can say these things and for justification. So in your homework, so make sure that you do that. Try to collect a variety of sources. And yeah, it's best to have at least two sources for each side of the argument. So pros and cons. Try to have two. So at least 8 sources. That's actually not a lot. It's very little. But for now, it's good. And if you want to add to it later, it's okay. And if you're writing the 5,000 word report, then it should be a lot more. But for now, try to collect as much information as you can. And yeah, it would be good. I would prefer it, and it would be easier for you if you write down which paragraph or which part or which page of the source you will be using, or that is relevant to you. Again, also tell me which argument is it for this website, which argument is it for. It could be you could use it more than once for this argument and for the next argument. It might include, a book could be including both arguments, but you have to repeat it for each one. I'll give you a template that you can use for next time. So I hope that made sense. And good luck with your homework. See you next week.